and what we plan to do initially and where we are at the moment, and possibly we can be able to have some interesting discussions and also explore possibilities of collaborations and to see where we can partner as we work towards the sustainable fisheries management in the world. So as Sven has mentioned, FiDEA is implemented in 3 countries, but I'll explain this. Well, 2 countries, Tanzania, that is with Zanzibar, and also with Mozambique. And the institutes are listed down here. I guess okay. Yeah, so just a brief, what is FiDEA? It's a short form for Fishing Data East Africa, and it's part of the MeerWissen projects that were approved in 2019. And FiDEA is basically a partnership that seeks to work with the fisheries institutions in Tanzania, that is Zanzibar, and Mozambique, to strengthen a science-based approach in decision-making with regards to data handling. So looking at the whole chain of fisheries data collection, right from the design, the collection, the storage of that data, analyzing that data, and making it in a format that can actually be used for decision-making. So with all this, it is very important that we also support the various institutions, not only in the storage and also collection, but also support them in terms of training so that they can be able to analyze the data and use it in its proper format. And through this process, we work very closely with the research, but also with the management institutions. So in almost every country, in developing countries, you have the Ministry of Fisheries, which is the primary responsibility. Their primary responsibility is to manage the fisheries, to come up with policies that can, help to sustainably manage the fisheries. But also within the same ministry, you have these departments that are divided. So you have the management part and you also have the research part. So trying to work with these 2 institutions to be able to work together towards harmonizing their approach in fisheries management. And when we initially started the discussions regarding FiDEA, we, of course, had 4 countries involved, that is Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. But along the way, Kenya dropped out because of other reasons, which I'll not explain for now. And the partnership was basically cemented by 3 institutions. So both TAFIRI, which is the Tanzanian Fisheries Research Institute, and IMS are basically in Tanzania, with Zanzibar considered independent because on issues to do with fisheries, it is not a union matter. So Zanzibar is considered on its own. But when we are talking about countries as a whole, then we focus on 2 countries, so Tanzania and Mozambique. And the whole process of, discussing about the overall objective of the project, what we need to focus on, and how to implement the project took quite a long time. So almost over a period of 8 months, there was negotiation between ZMT, which is the German partner, and the various institutions in Tanzania and Mozambique to be able to streamline the proposal and agree on the terms of reference and also on the implementation plan. But the question one might ask is, why is our focus mostly on fisheries data? Now, we all know that fisheries do play a big role in developing countries. Just last year, the FAO launched the biannual report on global fisheries, that is SOFIA. And again, what was emphasized over and over again is the role that fisheries continues to play globally in terms of food security, livelihoods, and also the well-beings. And this is particularly significant in tropical countries because we know that close to 90% of all employment from the fisheries sector, come from developing countries. And when we look at the Western Indian Ocean, where the 2 countries are situated, fisheries does play a very important role. And to a large extent, those who are involved in the fisheries are mostly small-scale fishermen, so at what we normally call artisanal. And these are basically fishermen who use non-motorized vessels and simple gears. But of course, the nature of the gears vary. So you have from traditional gears such as basket traps, but we also have more conventional gears like the gill nets and the hook lines. But overall, what makes these fisheries artisanal is the scale with which they operate. So they mostly operate inshore and they use non-motorized vessels, which in a sense also means that overall production is relatively low compared to large-scale industrial fisheries. So looking at the importance that fisheries plays in the livelihoods of these communities, it makes then sense that we need to focus on measures that can actually safeguard these resources, because the livelihoods and also food security overall is at risk, and hence our interest in fisheries data. But we all know that without the data itself, we are not able to come up with proper strategies. Now, if we just look at a few of the countries in the region, and in terms of their fisheries production, we see that Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania in the Southwest Indian Ocean are perhaps the largest contributors in terms of fisheries production. And if we look at in terms of what is landed, we see that, of course, you have quite a variety of species that are landed. But whenever these species are reported, they are not reported to the species level. They are mostly reported in aggregate form. So one of the challenges that we see in the region, that though fisheries does play a very important role, there are issues to do with monitoring of the fisheries. And from the regional state of oceans that was produced by WIOMSA and the UNEP, they make this very stark statement that in nearly all the countries in the Southwest Indian Ocean, there is a lack of sufficient data and expertise to fully describe the status of their fisheries. So if we look at the role that fisheries play, and with this statement, it basically says that while it is important, they do not fully understand the status of their fisheries and cannot be able to fully describe what they have. And hence, they need to have important measures or data to be able to inform management decisions. Because if you look, for example, at what is being reported here, I don't know if you can see my screen. So the highest category that is reported is marine fish NIE, which is basically everything that is aggregated together. So you cannot tell which species has been caught and in what proportions, but everything is aggregated together. And all this is because of a clear lack of monitoring, and also the lack of appropriate data that can actually be disaggregated at the species level. Therefore, when we now look at all this with regards to, for example, now the SDGs that have come in, SDGs do have some targets that each and every country, aspires to meet by 2030. And when you look at fisheries, SDG 14 specifically, 14.4 has a target whose has a target as an indicator that whose target was last year, that is 2020. And this demanded that, or this required that countries should be able to reduce all sorts of overfishing, implement a science-based management, and also get rid of IUU fishery by 2020. That was last year. And with a clear lack of data, with a clear lack of monitoring in place, most countries in the region will not be able to meet these targets as we commonly know. And hence, that is why FiDEA is more interested on issues of fisheries data, because by having fisheries data, we are able to process that and come up with appropriate information that can be used for decision making. So as I mentioned before, the process of designing the workshop, the project took a period of almost 8 months. And this was very important because through this, we could be able to put our minds together and know what is feasible and what is not feasible. So I'd just like to share with you our project plan. Sorry if it's too small for you to see, but I would just like to highlight on a few issues. So officially, the project began in July last year, July 2019. I'm still in 2019. And so far we've been able to implement quite a number, because when we started, I think we were quite lucky to be able to go through the process of contractual agreements with our partners very fast, and this in a sense fast-tracked the process of project implementation. And to date, I would say that we have covered quite a number of activities that were initially planned for. But of course, we know that the challenge has also come, and in March, we had just done with a training on stock assessment when COVID came in. So while COVID has, in a sense, also affected the project, we'll say that we had already implemented quite a number of activities, and key among these was the training on fisheries assessment, which I'm going to talk about briefly. So the project is structured into 5 work packages, and these are also disaggregated into measures which help us to track our progress. So the first part, of course, is to look at is to do review and assessment, where we try to understand, what is the state of art with regards to fisheries. So what do these institutions have? What are the limitations? What are the challenges that they face? So that we can be able to streamline our objectives clearly with what is actually on the ground, and then develop an appropriate strategy that can then help us to, implement the activities that we have. But I'll go through this one after the other, so I'll not take much time to talk about them here. So in our first year, when we with our first measure, that is a review and assessment, we had this stakeholders workshop in Tanzania, where more than 35 participants attended, and based from 4 different countries. And the first question that I would like to ask here, maybe as we continue, we will have some discussions at the end, but I would like you to reflect on some of these, and maybe from your experience, we can see what are the similarities or differences between what we experience and what maybe your projects also experience. So what role does stakeholders consultation or co-design play in any project implementation? Of course, MeerWissen has introduced us to the co-design principle when we came up with the project, which was quite important because all the partners will sit together on a table and agree and clearly outline, the project objectives, aims, activities, look at the budget. So everything was transparent. So in our experience, we learned that through this design, it brings some element of trust between the partners. It helps to build consensus, and also creates a sense of ownership between the, implementing partners or countries. And this is a very important part, because this, I would say, was kind of the launch pad for us when we started with the project, because through this process, everything was transparent, nothing was hidden, the budgets were clear. So it kind of helped us to, fast track the process, and everybody knew which role they're supposed to play in the project. And as we went along, one of the things that we had initially planned was that we would have a training and support workshop. And I would like to invite Saleh here to briefly talk and share his experience, because I don't want to do all the talking, so that we can be able to see, what were some of the lessons that we learned. And the question that I would also like to ask here is, when we focus on developing countries and the issues of data, the question is the problem really the lack of data or the inability to analyze and disseminate the information? So let me introduce Saleh so that he can take up this. Saleh.
Hello. Hello, Paul.
We can hear you, Saleh.
Okay. So you will not see me, but for reasons of network, I will just present. So we had this training course in March 2020, and it gathered a lot of interest, as you can see from the figure. Over 11 countries applied, but we only had slots for 25 people from the region. And so this was a 2-week workshop, and it was split into 2. The first 2 days were for policymakers and managers, where we presented or we discussed about fishery information systems and the results of an assessment which had been done prior on the various tools and fisheries data collection processes in the 3 countries, Tanzania, Mozambique, the 2 countries, Tanzania mainland and Zanzibar, and Mozambique. So this was a 2-day workshop for these policymakers and managers, and it was quite fruitful. And then after that, we had a 2-week training for the 25 participants from the region, mostly fisheries officers and researchers. And the aim of this workshop was to introduce concepts and monitoring processes of the SDG indicator 14.4.1, the data needs and the reporting process, and then present again the results of that assessment that had been done on the various fisheries information systems and data collection processes, and also theoretical and practical presentation of a range of modern data-limited stock assessment methods. And the participants had a chance to do hands-on analysis of data. This was an opportunity for researchers and policymakers and fisheries officers to work hand in hand. As you can see from the figures, we had field work. For some participants, it was quite familiar. For example, the participants from Mozambique, the fish markets were quite similar, the species are quite similar. So, but for others, it was quite different from what they have at home. So it was a unique opportunity, and we think it was quite productive. We had an assessment after the workshop, the evaluation, and most of the participants, over 90%, confirmed that the training workshop was worthwhile and that both the theoretical and practical aspects were crucial for understanding the SDG 14.4.1. And it provided a good background and introduced the essential skills. An output or outputs of the workshop were, first of all, in November 2019, the FAO had requested countries with marine and coastal areas to fill in a questionnaire on SDG 14.4.1. And by December deadline, they had to extend the deadline to end of January, and still only 3 countries had reported from the region. So one aim of this workshop and one output was the filling in of this questionnaire for the FAO, which we were able to do. And then we had training in the fisheries data analysis and using the R software or programming language. Lastly, I think, data needs. Countries still face challenges in the region, so we every country, the members presented their data needs, and we tried to find solutions. Various countries, I think, beginning with Mozambique and Madagascar, presented their needs to the FAO, especially with regards to fisheries information systems, the strengthening of those. And other countries were expected to follow up with these requests late after the workshop. Next slide, please. Yeah. So regarding digital tools, we found, for example, in our pre-assessment, that in Tanzania, for example, the various ministries and the various fisheries research institutes are using about not less than 4 fisheries information systems. So this brings about different data sets, what is reported to the FAO, which is more accurate. It's not very effective. And most of these are a result of different funding agencies funding fisheries projects to specific institutes, and they all see a need for fisheries information system, but each is going individually. We're not doing it nationally as a country or as a region. And after the project ends, the support ends. If there was a consultant who developed the fisheries information system, he or she goes away, and then we get a breakdown in the system, or we have to assign them to come and help again. And so this leads to a fragmentation of data. Paul may have some more to add on that. Paul?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Saleh. So one of the packages we are looking at is also how is there a need really to digitize that? I mean, everybody is now talking about digitization, and the question here will be really what technologies are needed and what should they address? And as Saleh has rightfully mentioned, is that one thing that we have discovered as we have been implementing the project on this digital platform was that, yes, every country wants to digitize, but we still have the problem of data quality, sampling design, and then once you even have the data, the challenge is having people who can be able to analyze the data and be able to process it and so that it can be in a usable format. And therefore, one thing that comes out from this is that really there are no shortcuts in this. And while we may want to rapidly move and deploy digital tools, it's very important for us to put in a lot of efforts on strengthening capacity to be able to design appropriate sampling strategies and ensure that the quality data is actually collected. Then we can focus on the tools as well. So there is no shortcut on this, and this is one thing that we want to overly emphasize as we continue on the project as well. But I'll be very happy to hear your experience. And another component of our project is to harmonization, and harmonization here, Saleh has briefly talked about. You have one of the challenges we face in fisheries institutions is, there's a lot of sectorization. So the research do their things, the managers do their thing, and there is really no working, together as a team. And one of the questions you can also ask is, as we discuss the issue of science to policy interface, that at what level should we bring in policymakers? So when we had this training workshop, we had both the policymakers, we had the researchers, and we also had fisheries managers. And it was rather interesting because when the countries are presenting on the results of their, fisheries analysis, while some policymakers may not be able to fully understand, they were actually intrigued by some of the figures that were being presented. So initially we thought, it's good to have policymakers alone first, and then we follow it up with the research. But rather what we understand now is that it's better to actually have them very early in the process and involve them in every step of the way, not with the assumption that they do not understand what is happening, but rather so that they can be able to understand the full extent of the fisheries data analysis. So right from the collection to the processing to the results section, it is only then that they can actually be able to deliver appropriate policy and guidelines that can then strengthen the management of fisheries in this country. And one thing that we are realizing now is that SDG 14 actually provides an appropriate platform where both policymakers, researchers, and managers can actually work together and reduce the divide that exists in most of these institutions. So here in the pictures you can see, you have a policymaker, you have two researchers, and you have a manager, all working together on fisheries data. The same here for the Tanzanian team, for the Zanzibar team, and again for the Tanzanian team. So it was quite, a sight to behold, when now people who ordinarily will communicate only through telephones or emails will actually work together and be able to produce results that they all, to some extent, agree on. So some of the takeaways for us is that, while FiDEA only started with two countries, that is Mozambique and Tanzania, Zanzibar included, one thing that we have now seen is that there's a lot of interest that has come up from other countries. So we have Madagascar, Comoros, Seychelles, Mauritius, all showing an interest to be involved in one way or another in the project. And while we agree that we do not have the budget or the time to really invest in all the countries, what we do now is to create kind of a conduit between us and institutions such as FAO, who are able to finance and able to support large-scale training or large-scale infrastructure development in some of these countries that is actually related to fisheries data collection. And this is currently happening behind the scenes. And also through this, we've also seen that we've developed a cooperation between FAO and ZMT. And we see that this is a partnership that has helped us a lot, particularly in being able to involve other countries that we were not able to. So being able to host 11 countries for the training would not have been possible within our budgets. But with this partnership, we've been able to bring in FAO and also WIOMSA, who have supported us. And we see this as a very important example of how we ought to move in the next decade, even as we promote the Ocean Decade for Sustainable Development. And through the pilot training, we've also seen that really there's a big gap in terms of training on data analysis and also even in the interpretation. And the reason why this is the case is because we only focus on fisheries research institutions. But now what we are learning is that we should also focus on the universities, because almost all these researchers, almost all these managers come from universities. And so long as universities still continue to train on obsolete tools and methods which are no longer valid, we still, in a sense, promote the same in our various fisheries institutions. And then the turnover rate in most of these institutions is quite high. And some of those officers who are responsible for those departments do not necessarily possess a background in fisheries. So a lot still has to be done in terms of capacity building on fisheries data collection, analysis, and interpretation. We should not assume that the mere fact that somebody is working in those institutions gives them the knowledge to be able to process and also to be able to make decisions in the right way. And through this, we've also been able to now create a network of fisheries institutions. And also we are currently in, we've had several discussions with WIOMSA to see how best can we be able to support the issues of fisheries science in the region. We know that we have a working group on ocean acidification and on MPAs in the WIO region. But one thing that came up from our discussion with WIOMSA is that there is really no working group on fisheries. And while SWIOFC, which is a regional fisheries body, is involved in the region, they're not directly involved so much at the country level. So hence, it is important for us to continue building support for these countries and also help, in a sense, to build a strong working group of fisheries going forward. And one thing also is that through this, we aim to continue still strengthening the network of scientists in the region by providing constant online trainings and webinars to continue upgrading their skills and knowledge on fisheries tools to help in proper management of data, but also in the management of these fisheries. So this is the project team. We have Matthias, who is our project lead, and then we have Dr. Rushingisha from Tafiri, Saleh from IMS, Isabel from IIP, and Paul from ZMT. So thank you very much, and I'll be glad to hear from your experiences in your projects and also be happy to answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the great presentation, and thank you, Saleh, also for the great presentation and for the fantastic insights into your project and project development and implementation. I think you're on a good track, and you have a good cooperation and hopefully a long-lasting cooperation with FAO over the next Ocean Decade. And now I would like to open the discussion, and please ask your questions and raise up your hands, and then you will have the floor. Or if you have some comments to Paul, I think Paul raised up some questions, and I would like to address them now to you. And yeah, so please, or you can also type them, of course, in the chat. Sebastian Ferse, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian Ferse, ZMT Future Earth Coasts. Thank you, Paul and Saleh, for that interesting presentation. I have a question with regards to the stakeholder involvement that you spoke to. Paul, you mentioned that it's desirable to have, or it was positive to have the policymakers involved at the different steps and early on in the process. And I agree that that, of course, is desirable. But the experience also is that oftentimes policymakers and politicians have very busy schedules and have little time to devote to extracurricular activities, so to say. So can you share some insights, what made that possible, and what your experience was, how you got the policymakers involved so intimately throughout the process.
I'll let me leave this to Saleh so that he can share with us the experience, because then I can be able to add on to that. Saleh, please go ahead first.
Hi, I can only speak from our side, Tanzania. It's we were lucky. Our policymakers are actually marine scientists or fishery scientists, so they had an interest in the matter from the beginning. And in fact, for example, in our training workshop, some of them did not leave on the second day. They wanted to continue for a few days to join the training, but of course they could not do the whole 2 weeks. So it was easy. After that, we would just follow up and with reference to the workshop or to our prior discussions, and they were on board. They are still on board.
Let me also add on to that. I think, as you rightfully said, Sebastian, that politicians are always very busy. And one interesting example is when we were having the training, the Permanent Secretary of Fisheries from Zanzibar, we had invited him for the opening of the ceremony. And then after the opening of the ceremony, as usual, we expected him to leave and go. But he stayed for more than 3 days. And the reason why he stayed was because he understood and knew the importance of fisheries to the country. But also one thing that also intrigued him a lot was the issue of the digitization of the fisheries data collection. So long as there is interest and so long as they see the need of the country is being addressed in that particular project, then they take an extra initiative. And we did not have to ask him to come the next day. So we were actually quite surprised to see him more than 2 occasions on the second and the third day coming to actually also be able to see what the scientists from Zanzibar were doing. So I think in as much, so the assumption normally is, of course, that they are busy and they don't, at times they're not interested. But I think with the right incentive, they get really involved because they really want to take steps, necessary steps to ensure that things are done right. And finally, one of the things I also want to point out is at the moment, as we talk now, is that Tanzania, of course, is in the process of digitizing its fisheries information system. So they have a platform called ICAS, which is a mobile-based data collection system that they're using to collect fisheries data. And when we did the review to look at the sustainability of the ICAS system with FAO, one thing that came out was that this is a system that is quite unique and can actually be supported because it's locally made and it's locally supported. So the Minister for Fisheries from Tanzania was quite interested and came to the meeting and asked, we would like to know how this is going to be taken forward. And as we speak now, a letter has formally come from him requesting for additional support so that this system can actually be integrated so that they can be able to have results generated from the platform itself. So long as there's an appropriate incentive and they see that this is actually benefiting the sector, I think they will more likely be happy to participate in the process than we assume. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Janina, you do have a question.
Thank you. Yes, first of all, congratulations. I think it's great to hear how far you've come with the FiDEA project and what you've achieved. It looks and sounds really great. And also to the question before, I think it's really an interesting example of a best practice of involving policymakers and certainly something where I can think that's valuable to share. And as you said, sometimes it's just really, sometimes you're just lucky for the people who are in their position. But on the other hand, I think it's also about being clear on the incentives and outcomes for policymakers of participating in such a process. What I was wondering, and I think it's more of an overall question, not necessarily directed to your project, but you clearly showed SDG 14.4. The indicators were ending last year, and as several of the targets of SDG 14. We were not able to achieve them at all, actually. So I was really wondering what your thoughts and opinions are on what should be our priorities for the coming 10 years and for doing better in achieving these targets. And that's maybe a question for science, but also from our perspective, what could be the role of organizations such as GIZ? And you also talked about the different aspects of the problem. I mean, it's not only data, it's analyzing the data, it's feeding the data into decision making. So there are so many challenges on different levels, and I wonder what your thoughts are on priorities or how to approach this complex topic in a way that we can do better in actually achieving the targets we set out to achieve.
Saleh, would you like to start, or you want me to start?
You start.
Okay. So I'll try and share from our experience with the reporting on SDG 14. So what happened last year was, for example, the institution that is charged with the monitoring of the progress towards SDG 14, FAO, sent these documents to various countries to be able to fill, so that they can actually assess, how far have they come in terms of meeting those various targets. And as Saleh has rightfully said, the deadline for doing this was December, somewhere in November last year. And no, it was actually 2019, sorry, I'm 1 year behind. So it was supposed to be 2019, November. But by December, only 3 countries from the region had submitted this questionnaire. When we actually came now to the training workshop where we presented the results, so every country was presenting their results on what they had done and the difficulties or challenges they experienced in submitting data towards their progress. One thing that came out clearly was that, one, we do not have the data that you are asking for. So you want us to report on the proportion of stocks that are sustainably fished. One, we don't have the data. And 2, if we have the data is not in a state that allows us to be able to quantify which stocks have actually been, sustainably fished or not. And where we have some of that data, we are unable to be able to interpret it in the indices that you are asking for. So it was rather not only the lack of data, but it was all lack of data. It was having the right data. It was understanding what was needed and also being able to report exactly on those indices that were required. And as we know, most countries do not invest in fisheries data collection. So the budgetary allocations from every country that goes into fisheries data collection is quite low. And going through some of the landing sites, we could see, for example, a landing site with more than 300 vessels, you only have 2 data collectors. And they're using a manual, data collection system, which is not bad. But then you see the challenges of collecting data. You look at the budgetary allocations, and then you look at the capacity that is actually needed now to be able to transform data into usable information is all lacking. So it is important to have targets. It's important to have these guidelines. But unless we go a step further to actually help support the various countries to be able to know what is needed. So what we are doing now is basically sitting down with the countries and asking them, okay, realistically speaking, how many fishery stocks can you, monitor? Can we target 3 or 4? Then can we collect data on those 3 and 4 and be able to then kind of build a system where we can be able to monitor, we can be able to analyze, and we can be able to report on those. So this is a more simplistic way of doing it rather than trying to assess the entire fishery. And this has to be done continuously. So it's not a one-time thing. And then the element of also being able to share information between institutions. So if you do not bring researchers and managers, so the Department of Fisheries and the research institutions together, then the process of reporting also becomes a problem, because what the researchers are reporting and what the managers are reporting are completely different, because they're collecting data on different scales. So having the 2 institutions working together is key. in strengthening this process. So rather than focusing on very huge things, I'll think about strengthening the capacity of the institutions, one, to work together, to be able to share information together, then be able to report and actually be able to see how best they can be able to meet some of these targets. But if Sally wants to add something, please go ahead.
I think you covered it quite well. Maybe I'll just add that we also, data quality at the moment may be compromised by what you said, lack of staff. Also, the effort is not, the quality could be higher with less effort. For example, you find fisheries officers recording catch at landing sites 16 or more days per month, which is unnecessary. You can collect for less days, higher quality data, and then use the other time for other fisheries management efforts. So updating our methods also would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Saleh. Are there any more questions or maybe comments? I can't see any questions. Maybe I will raise the question to you, Paul. You were talking about the co-design process and approach, and that it helped you. But do you see some improvements in this kind of process, where we could have, let's say, a better consultation of the stakeholders? That in the end we could have maybe also better results and impacts in the region?
Personally, I would say that from my experience in the project, co-design really helped a lot, because it already helped us to put our minds together and ask ourselves, what are really the needs, or what are the issues that we need to address. Often what happens at times is, whenever we have these calls, perhaps sitting somewhere in my office, I would already draft a concept and then share with my partners in, let's say, in East Africa, and tell them, there's this call, I have this idea, what do you think? And maybe because of time, or because of a general lack of being involved in the process, they will just say yes, and they will go along with that. But this kind of provided us with an opportunity now to sit down and really critique ourselves and ask ourselves, but is this really a need, yes or no? And I think that is the process where it makes that process of writing and agreeing on the project, quite transparent. And when you're talking about the budgets, the activities, who is supposed to do what, it becomes much more clearer. So there are no hidden expectations. Often at times, I think the challenge with some of the projects that I've not gone through the core design is that the expectations are quite mismatched. So while one partner, maybe in Germany, may have these expectations on their partner in developing countries, the other partner has completely different expectations. So it helps to kind of bring expectations at the same level and kind of build consensus in the process. So one thing for me that will help take this even further, would be to think about, how do we move beyond just the project implementation, but also in terms of thinking about the future, the sustainability after the project. How do we think about the issues of data integrity? How do we share data? How do we ensure it's open access? So of course, this we may not have necessarily discussed exhaustively during the core design, but I think it will be an integral part of core design, where we look at the entire process, including the results, how to disseminate that, and even how to share data and make it accessible to others. Yeah, that would be my contribution.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from your side? Don't be shy. I do actually have another question to you, Paul. You mentioned it, the kind of sustainability. At the moment, our projects last 2 years. So it's not a very long duration. And when it comes to sustainability, do you have some ideas what would help to have long-lasting impacts from the project? So I mean, the co-design approach is actually one, but maybe there are another kind of priorities also we have to set that the projects are very have a huge impact to and local and regional applicability, for example.
One thing that I think affects sustainability of projects is because the way the projects are probably designed from the beginning are more or less, time bound. So let's say we do it only 2 years and we don't look at long-term impacts or outcomes. And I think one of the things that will help a lot in creating sustainability is one, partnership. So we must ensure that the project is properly embedded within the local institutions. So if you're working with the fisheries institutions, for example, in our case, ensure that the primary institutions that are involved in fisheries are actually involved in the process. Because beyond the project, they are still there. They're being funded by their governments. And ensuring that they're well embedded in the project make sure that there's some sort of a continuity, even if the funding scheme ends. There are certain things that they can actually be able to take in their day-to-day activities or their day-to-day duties. So, for example, fisheries data collection will continue to take place even after FiDEA. They will not stop. But helping them to come up with appropriate ways of designing and collecting the data is something they can actually be able to embed in their work. So that would be one, that we work closely with local institutions. And two, another thing that I would say is also to create a network and collaborate with other programs or projects. Having this Rambo approach, where your project seems to be the only one that is going to offer solutions to everything, I think is a thing of the past. We've learned, for example, we were not able to implement the project in Madagascar, Comoros, but through, for example, partnership with WIOMSA, with the FAO, with other interested partners, we can be able to also bring in on board other stakeholders who are already engaged in the projects, but also in the region, and they can be able to take up certain activities that are not necessarily within the project itself. So collaborating with other projects is key, and ensuring that you kind of ask yourself, so what role can we, for example, as ZMT or as other institutions, what role can we actually play in the process? And what is the strength of the other partner? So being able to explore the strengths of other projects or other partners in the process can help to, promote sustainability. And finally, I think also one thing that comes into play is that, donors need to talk to each other. I hope this is not a critical statement, but I remember, for example, when we had our kickoff meeting, so our guest of honor, who was basically coming from the German embassy, said, "Oh, actually from here, I'm going to another project launch, which is also being implemented by another German agency, but more or less in the same sector, fisheries." So, and the question was, do you know about this project? And we did not know about the project. So I think it's important also for donors and also government agencies that are funding to be able to talk to each other and know, which project is being implemented where, by who, and what are the outcomes, what are the goals, so that there can be synergy in that, and that this also helps to avoid a lot of confusion, particularly when you're working with the same government institutions. So those could be my views that I think could also help strengthen sustainability in the region.
Thank you. That will help us, definitely. And is there anybody who would like to add something to this or have some experience, some questions? You have mentioned it. Yes, Matthias? You are on mute.
I know. Yes, sorry for that. Yes, I think in a way, FiDEA is also an example of a project which has benefited a lot from a long-lasting partnership in the region. I mean, ZMT, who is the implementing institution of the project, has been active in collaborations with the region for many, many years. So partnerships were established already some years before. The same holds for the FAO, which is a partner, was a partner in FiDEA, very much interested in the region and to continue their work and their support. So I think this is an example of a positive example of a long-lasting collaboration. And I think one of our concluding remarks in the presentation of Paul, that we need to have this network of support. I think this is something we really should look at. We should try to keep this network of support alive through very many different activities. Some of them we mentioned in the talk, these online courses and webinars, for example. But we need, as Paul said, we need to keep talking to each other. I mean, beyond the project time frame, there will be still be the partners interested in fishery in East Africa, and we should keep talking. We should keep planning for other projects. So this is just a very general remark, but I think this is important. We need a long-lasting perspective. That's very important for having success with these initiatives.
Thank you, Matthias. Yeah, I do think the same, that definitely will help to sustain the project impact. And yeah, I think maybe that we will come to the end. If there are no more questions from your side, I would like to thank you, Paul, and you, Saleh, for your great presentations and your definitely very interesting insights. And as I said before, I think you are on a very good track now with your training courses and with the cooperation with FAO. And I think this is really a best practice example. Matthias, you would like to add something? No, it was before your hand, right? Okay. And yeah, first I wish you for FiDEA all the best for the future. And we, of course, are connected very closely. And so we will continue our webinar on the 27th of January with the African Pendulums project. I will send an invitation in the upcoming week. And for those of you who have not registered yet, please sign for a date and time for your project presentation in this MeerWissen series. There is in the channel, in the webinar channel, in our MS Teams room, there is already a schedule where you can add your project. And so, yeah, thank you very much. That's for today. And thank you for attending. And so we hope then to see you next time. And stay healthy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.